This is the online tutorial on how to use the hypothetical calculator for the PSC 2016 pay cycle change. In order to bring PSC into line with best pay practices, we're going to begin paying our employees on the Friday following the end of a pay period. PSC currently pays salaried employees on the last day of the pay period without any gap between the end of the pay period and the pay date. For salaried employees that earn overtime, the current practice results in a 2-week delay before overtime is paid. The other thing that's a little bit confusing about this is that for those salaried employees, again, who earn overtime, their regular hours and their overtime hours are paid on 2 different paychecks. And this can be very confusing for some employees, and it's very difficult to explain clearly when employees have questions in regard to their check. So, in order to consolidate regular time and overtime onto one paycheck, a 1-week gap will be established beginning with your first payday in August of 2016. Now, for some employees, establishing that 1-week gap might pose a hardship. In order to minimize any hardship, PSC is prepared to offer employees a pay advance of 1 week's salary that can be repaid over a time period of 4, 6, or 8 pay periods. Hopefully, this will lessen the burden that an employee may experience as a result of this change. Now, if you have a clear understanding of the pay cycle change and you know with certainty that you will not elect to take the pay advance, then there's really no need for you to view the remainder of this tutorial. Its primary focus will be on giving employees an understanding of how they can calculate the impact of the change, as well as any impact to their net pay. So we developed this hypothetical calculator in Microsoft Excel so that you can have a better understanding of how this might impact you. When you open the spreadsheet initially, you will see in the first tab a text box with some instructions. The first paragraph gives you the why on why this change is taking place. The second paragraph gives some instructions with regard to how to operate the calculator itself. And the third paragraph is really just a footnote that talks about message boxes that will appear when your mouse or your cursor hovers over certain cells. The message boxes explain that number's relevance to the spreadsheet and its relevance to you. With regard to the calculator, really all you have to worry about is the orange box and the green box. Those are the 2 cells that you will key in, and it's all that you need for the spreadsheet to calculate how this circumstance will impact you. So let's move on to the hypothetical tab. Just take your cursor and move down here and click the hypothetical tab. And there's the green box and the orange box that we were talking about. Now you'll notice that those message boxes appear when we hover over the cell with our mouse. Any cell that has a red triangle in the upper right-hand corner has a message box associated with it. That message will detail what that cell represents. So if we hover our cursor over the orange box, the message asks us to please enter gross pay. Now you can use an hourly amount if you like, but since this affects primarily salaried employees, we're going to use an annualized amount. So we're going to enter $50,000. We're going to assume that this person in this hypothetical that we're going to do earns $50,000. Then you can either use your mouse and click into the green box, or you can hit the enter key, or you can hit the tab key. It really doesn't matter. You can do either of those 3. It'll move the focus to the green box, and then this is where we will enter net pay. But before we enter net pay, let's talk about what we're looking at on the rest of this top line. The $1,923.08, that represents the gross pay that this person would earn per paycheck if their annual salary is $50,000 a year. The $961.54 represents actually 2 things. It represents the weekly gross pay of this person that we say makes $50,000 per year. It also represents the pay advance that this person would receive if they were to elect to take the pay advance. So because PSC is offering a 1-week pay advance, this number also represents the gross pay that this person would receive if they decided not to take the pay advance. That might be a little bit confusing, but essentially what it means is this person would earn $961.54 during that week where we transition the pay cycle. They would earn $961.54 before taxes, insurance, their 401k, and any other deductions. Those deductions would come out of the $961.54, and whatever was left over would be their net pay for that paycheck. That would be their take-home pay. We'll get into what these 3 boxes mean here in just a minute after we key in our net pay. So if our annual income is $50,000 and we key that in, we next need to key in our net pay. So assuming that our taxes, and our 401k and all of our other withholdings take about 1/3 of this person's paycheck, that would mean that they have 2/3 of their paycheck left over. So 2/3 of our paycheck left over on a per pay period basis, earning $50,000 a year. Our take-home pay, or our net pay, would be about $1,260. So we'll key that in. You'll get your net pay from a previous pay stub. Remember to use a net pay number that is typical for how much you take home each pay period. If you use a check stub with a lot of overtime on it, and you don't always work a lot of overtime, it's going to throw your numbers off. So be sure that you use a net pay number that's typical for how much you take home on a per pay period basis. We'll key in the $1,260 right here, and then hit enter. What happens now is we see 3 numbers that show up here on line 4. Those numbers represent your adjusted net pay after paying back your installment from your pay advance. So looking at the numbers in column F, the payback amount per paycheck would be $240.38. That would leave your net pay of about $1,019.62, which is the green box net pay that you keyed in from a previous check stub, with the $240.38 taken out. If you choose to repay the advance over 6 pay periods, the amount that you would pay back per check would be $160.26, which means that your net pay would be roughly $1,099.74. And if you choose to pay back your advance over 8 pay periods, the per check deduction would be $120.19, and your take-home pay would be roughly $1,139.81. And these are all based on this hypothetical person's salary of $50,000 a year, assuming that they take home about 66% of their pay. Now remember, this is a hypothetical calculator, so the numbers that are generated based on what you key in the orange and green boxes, these are just estimates. They're not exact numbers, but they should get you close enough so that you can gauge the impact of this change. The person in this hypothetical would have to decide whether they would prefer their first check in August be a net check based off of a gross of $961.54, or whether they would prefer to take the advance and pay it back over 4, 6, or 8 pay periods. The choice would be theirs to make, and ultimately whatever you decide to do will be completely up to you. If you have any questions, certainly you can contact your payroll point of contact, whether that is someone here at the corporate office or whether you typically speak with someone in the hub. They're all very well versed in this calculator and the logic behind all of this. So if you have any questions, you can talk to your payroll advisor and then we can go from there. Thanks so much for taking the time to look at this tutorial. And if you have any questions, just let us know.